To introduce you as a partnership, we have been working with a number of the MPO organisations in Plymouth to develop this initiative. So that includes the Box, Theatre Royal Plymouth, Barbican Theatre Plymouth, Cast, Literature Works, Rio, Take Apart and Plymouth Culture. And this was really an acknowledgement that in the times we're living in, resources are of course scarce and are likely to become scarcer. So we need to work within the resources that we have. So our response has been to pool existing resources from our MPO budgets. We recognise that within that MPO structure, there are a number of organisations that are either support organisations or band 3 organisations. And that means that we also have a requirement and a desire to support the wider sector. And this is where this sort of driving force to come together has come from. Its purpose is not about emergency funding. So we looked very carefully at what other funding was out there and what other commissions were out there. And there is, as you will appreciate, a lot of emergency funding at the moment, which quite rightly is about sector survival. But what we were noticing was at this point in time, there isn't a huge amount of developmental money. So money that is about future working, future developing. And so what we wanted was to address those two aspects. We needed to make sure that there was funds and cash injected directly into the sector, but with a long-term view to that work. And that's why we've adopted a model of investment rather than purely commissioning. We don't want to specify at this point any artistic outputs. Instead, what we're inviting is proposals whereby this fund would seed fund ideas, concepts, projects, initiatives that very much have some longevity to them and are about tackling some of the challenges we face in Plymouth. Now, we obviously listed a few of those challenges to give people an idea within the documentation. And some of that is about working with our communities in a digital space. Some of it is about the structure and the system of the sector, so how we support freelancers, how we look at the system that we are in and how we might rectify some of those imbalances and inequalities. But also wider global issues around diversity of voice, diversity of community, climate emergency, and the list goes on. So we've given some suggestions there about some of the challenges we're facing in Plymouth, but also that affect us globally. And really the invitation is to look at ourselves as a kind of model pilot city, and how would we support initiatives that would help the city to address some of these challenges and help to reimagine what the sector and the city could be in this post-COVID world, which I'm sure will happen at some point. Again, we don't know when, but that's sort of the hope that we live with. So we're opening it to Southwest-based organisations and individuals, but it is very much about Plymouth. So we've made it clear within this that we need to ensure that any organisations or individuals that are applying from outside of the Plymouth area have a genuine and demonstrable link to Plymouth. That includes the partnerships that they're working with, either past, current or future, and that when you're submitting your application, it is not a speculative partnership. We need to be sure that you're not just listing a range of people that you will contact if successful, but actually that you have those partnerships in place and whether it's commissioning freelancers to work within the Plymouth setting or whether it's working with organisations, we need to make sure that that is a live, real partnership and project proposal that's being submitted. What we want to do through this process as well, and this is partly about how we change the model of funding, is to ensure that there is a support structure throughout the process. So for each project or individual that is awarded funding, they will be partnered with an MPO organisation as a mentoring role. Now, that won't necessarily be based on art form. That might be based on the way in which you're working. So if you're working, if your project's very much about working with community, we would link you to an MPO organisation that has expertise in that area. Equally, if your project is about working with young people, we would link you on that basis. So it's not necessarily going to be theatre with theatre or writing with writing or something like that. It's about the focus of your project and where that mentoring would best be served. Alongside that, we also don't want each organisation to just work on their own projects. This for us is about starting a process of sharing and scaling the best practice. So all of the initiatives we would bring together as a group, and through a process most likely around an action learning set, so that you're coming together to receive some peer-to-peer support as well as MPO support, and that you're helping to solve collective challenges that you might be facing along the way, and to share some of the knowledge and the expertise that you're building in that process. So it's worth bearing in mind that that's an element of the support, but obviously it's a time commitment as well to be part of that collective sort of cohort within the city. And we can do a lot of that obviously digitally, and subject to the regulations changing, how best to do that and where people are located. So we'll make sure that that is a platform that everyone can access and works for people's current locations. We obviously haven't specified outcomes in this, we're not commissioning a particular piece of work or particular outcome, but what we are interested in is understanding how this work will be shared and how this work goes beyond being an individual initiative. So your projects may be very, very different, and you might end up within your own initiative with a website or a beta version of an app or a workshop or a theatre performance or something like that. But what we will want to do collectively is look at how we disseminate that information. So we're quite interested in the outcomes of the collective that might be a video or an exhibition, or it might be a written report, or it might be a written book. There are lots of ways in which we will kind of produce something through this process, as well as the individual outputs that you would have with the project. So that will be negotiated on an individual basis. We're very open to that, but it is to bear in mind that this is about disseminating best practice and having a clear understanding, if the project sort of research phase is successful, how would it be scaled up and adopted by other organisations or across the city, or in a more sort of long-term sustainable way. And we're open to how that kind of manifests itself through the partnership. We will sort of ensure that that is in a contracted format as well. So once the proposal's been accepted, that will be written in on an individual basis to the contracts and the grant funding letter that you would receive. So they will look slightly different, but they will be bespoke to the projects that you're working on. This is very much an R&D phase. So this, we're okay and comfortable with the fact that these might be concepts. These might have had some testing but are not fully developed, and that this is going to be about working in a way that is testing and piloting and prototyping activity. And we obviously want to make sure that we can move beyond that phase, but the funding is purely around research and development at the moment. So as we come towards the end of that phase, which will be around the end of February 2021, we will be talking with each of the projects and looking at the possibility of entering a second phase where those projects can be fully produced, developed, commissioned, whatever the relevant sort of process might be, into a second phase. Now that's unfunded at this point, but part of coming on board with this partnership will be looking at how we would fund a second phase that takes those projects and initiatives through to full production or development. So there are no guarantees around that, and that won't apply to every project, but that is certainly our intention, is to help with that conversation and look at how we move it into something sustainable. We will have a panel making the selection. As you would expect, all the funding MPO partners will be participating in that shortlisting process in the first stage. So it'll be a two-phase selection process. All of the funding partners will be involved in a shortlisting activity. That shortlist will then be passed to a panel, which will consist of some of the MPO organisations in the city, as well as external individuals. Those external individuals we deem external because they will be outside of the MPO organisations. They will be outside of Plymouth and even the southwest kind of eligible area. And they will be from different art forms, and they will also be from different sectors, so that we have a kind of diversity of representation across our panel. That's likely to consist of about 7 people. We're just waiting for final confirmation on a few, so as soon as those are announced, we will make that information available on the website as well. And we will look to ensure that there is an independent chair overseeing that process. The chair will not have a vote. They will purely be there to prod and poke and make sure the right questions are asked and answered by the panel. Again, we'll make that available on the website so that you have an understanding of who will be making the selection process. That for me is where I'm going to stop in terms of the outline of the project and how we have arrived here today. I'd like to remind you to just put questions in the chat about anything. It can be as practical as you like, or as detailed as you want. We're happy to answer technical as well as artistic questions that you might have, or send those through to Sabrina. So what I'd like to do now is just hand over to a couple of colleagues to say a few words on this. In the first instance, Mandy Precious from Theatre Royal. I'd like to hand over to you, Mandy.
Hi everyone. So I've got to disappear in a few minutes because I've got another meeting at 10, but I just wanted to, I guess, just say why we're sort of coming into working together in the way that we've pooled our resources. I think initially when we discussed this, it was very much around a kind of recovery, how we get out of the place that we're in. And it occurs to me that there's only one way of doing that, and that's together. There is no way that any individual organisation or individual artist is going to be able to survive unscathed through this sort of pandemic or through this phase of closure. And if we are going to survive and thrive into the future, we need to take a collective approach to how to do that, to think in different ways, to think across art form, to think just to really pool resources in all aspects, not just financially, to seek solutions, and to make our way through to a place where post-COVID we are in a better place, and a better place than we were in pre-COVID is what my ambition is, so that we're not back in those silos and just busy doing our own thing, that we are in fact a cultural sector that can speak together and impact together and change things together. That's all I'm going to say, so I'll hand back to you, Hannah.
Brilliant, thanks Mandy, that's really helpful, and obviously great to have you on board as a partner. Could I hand over now to Laura Creefman, who's CEO of Barbican Theatre Plymouth, just to share their view on kind of their involvement in the partnership as well.
Great, very nice to meet you all. We're involved because we think it's really important as an MPO that the shift that Plymouth is making to be as collegiate and collaborative and transparent and supportive as it can be, and that part of that creative growth for the city is making sure that we support the wider ecology in Plymouth, and that we don't presume we have all the answers. So there's something really exciting about being able to invest in as partners in this fund, so that we can create space for other voices to be heard and supported, and ideas to come through which might be beyond our potential thinking or our vision, and actually really strengthen the city, especially at this time. I think it's really exciting to think about what we might be able to support. I don't think we know, and I think that's what we're really excited by. We were really careful about the language we chose about talking about creatives, so that it's anybody, whether or not that's visual artists or musicians, or it's anything within that creative industries, about what that creative and cultural voice is coming through. And I'm interested in what that allows us to look at as a city, and what might come through which is unique to Plymouth as ideas, and how we're building that ecology. And I think it's also, what we're trying to do is create a space for the cultural voice in the city, for some practitioners feel supported to develop their cultural voice in this new landscape, when so many of our models have changed and we're all really aware of that, but actually allow them to find new ways of working that might be able to be sustainable or help amplify or mean new ideas or new creative voices come through, or their own creativity comes through in a completely different way. We're hoping that this might be an opportunity for something we didn't even know was possible. And that's what I'm really excited about by what we've all invested in, and the fact that we can support across a range of between 3,000 to 10,000, even at this stage. That feels like a really huge thing for us to be able to do and to support. So that's from me.
Great, thank you, Laura. And yeah, we really don't know what's going to come forward, and I think that's what we wanted. So we're very open and looking forward actually to thinking about what might come into those proposals. So thank you. And so now just to Donna Howard, who is a director at CAST, Contemporary Visual Arts Gallery in the city, to say a few words on their involvement in the project.
Hi, yeah, so backing what Mandy and Laura have just said, just trying to add a few other things. I think for us, CAST has come from like a derelict building and grown over a period of time. And I think what we've learned over that time is that collective working, that partnership working is really important to how you can sort of extend capacity. So I think that idea about where we sit at the moment as MPOs is really another way for us to work across MPOs, as well as that way of working ourselves, which is really exciting for us. I think that idea of pooling resources and that ability to then extend what this initiative could be is, I suppose, in a sense, our being here is, I suppose, that MPO network. We can really start exploring what that then looks like as not just where we sit now, because actually where we sit now, I think, is almost that crisis point, but what that midpoint and long term looks like. Then I think that's where it can become quite exciting for an initiative like this, where I was looking yesterday at, you know, some of the initiatives out there, and for this to be as much about, you know, the concept and the process as much as the outputs is quite exciting when you look at it from a contemporary arts point of view, because we very much work like that, not knowing a lot of what we're doing and why we're doing it, but knowing that we want to do it and we've got something to communicate or something to do, but not knowing what the outcome would be. I think is really good to consider that to the wider sector and what that means across, you know, outside of contemporary art, what that means across art form. I think that becomes exciting, that, you know, maybe a project, initiative, an artist can then look at, you know, how they explore things creatively, how they test, how they can be supported in doing that, I suppose, through the network. And what does the network give them in terms of added value? Well, you know, just the MPOs together, us working together, gives strength. And then I suppose, in a sense, it's a network, it's a knowledge, it's a skills, it's a resource, it's a capacity, it's all of those things. And I think that's where it can become exciting, because where will each of those projects go? And it's good to think about them in stages, that, you know, something really has a potential to go somewhere, that it has a second stage. So for CAST, like, we're really excited to be in this project.
Fantastic, thanks Donna, that's great, and great to have you involved in the partnership as well. So we're starting to get some questions coming in, thank you, that's great, and always helpful when it is a Q&A session to have a few questions. So what we will do is start answering some of those now, but keep them coming through, and Sabrina will send through others as well. So question, Stephen, and I think others share that question, is around who best to kind of lead the application if you're in a partnership that involves individuals or organisations outside of the city. My take on that certainly would be that if genuinely you are leading something, then absolutely that's where the application should come from. And so if that involves other partners outside of the city, that's okay, that's fine. And I would say that, you know, put in where the reality of the driving force is. And so if this is a researcher's project that's come to you at the gallery, then that's the way around it should be. But if you are developing a project and involving a researcher, then lead from that. And for us, it's just to make sure that the benefit is felt in Plymouth and part of that programme in the first instance. So we won't be, downgrading projects that are one way or the other, but we would want to see the genuine driving force behind that project being listed as the lead partner. And if at any point I'm not actually answering your question, then do say, and we can revisit them. Helen's asked about live elements, and there's another similar question about kind of the R&D aspect. So we're referring to it as R&D, but absolutely there can be prototypes, there can be live elements, there can be things that are concluded as part of that process before the deadline. That's absolutely fine. In fact, we would want to see that as part of the project. And what we would say is, if there are live elements, they need to be part of shaping your development. So they are, part of the process rather than just the end point. And I think that's the difference here. So if you're coming to us now saying we want to deliver this show at Christmas, then we would probably have some concerns about that, because what are you developing as part of that, and what is that show testing? That's the bit we need to know. And that's, I guess, what for us we're seeing makes it a research and development phase. There can absolutely be live things, there can be delivered things, there can be piloted and prototype things, but it must still be part of developing your understanding and the project in the longer term. Hopefully that answers your question as well, Anne, about the prototyping. We definitely want to see it in this phase. Yes, small projects. So Joe, this question about smaller projects, this I guess is where we put the funding range in, because there might be some projects that are very practical but are still about researching something. So these aren't specifically research projects. They can be action-based research projects, they can be practice-based research projects. For us, a production or a piece of work can still be informing some sort of learning or some sort of understanding that we want to take forward. So we would absolutely consider that as part of that cohort, and really important that this isn't just an academic process. This is actually quite the opposite. We're talking about seed funding projects and initiatives, not just paying for research. So that it can absolutely come into that space, and that would be what we would want to see out of this, definitely. So some of those might be very small, tangible, direct, focused projects as part of that mix. That's brilliant. That's what we'd want to see. Can you partner with an MPO organisation? We very much, I guess the key emphasis here is we don't want money going to the MPO organisations. That's the bottom line. So if you need to partner for expertise, access, research, fine. But we do not want money transferring to the MPOs in Plymouth or any other MPO across the country, because that, in our mind, is not where the money needs to be spent right now. What we will do as well is, part of your relationship with your MPO organisation will be that they can help broker relationships and conversations for you. So they will obviously be your main point of contact, and hopefully they'll have some immediate expertise because of the nature of their work that they can put into your project. But part of their role will also be about going and talking to other MPOs or bringing in other partners and networks and expertise. And my colleague Sabrina will play a sort of central role in helping to make that brokerage possible and putting people in touch as well. So if you need access through this as the project evolves to other expertise, that will be part of the mentoring role of the MPO organisation to help with that. I don't know whether any of the other partners, like Laura or Donna, if you want to hop in on any of those questions at this point or answers.
I think it's mainly the MPO part in terms of that mentorship role. I think what we've sort of talked about was that idea that that is the point of the network. So even if someone came to us with a project that, sat with CAST, how I would look at it, it would be my role to also connect with the other MPOs, but also connect beyond the MPOs. So, you know, if there's the opportunity to touch with business, or there's the opportunity to consider what funding looks like, it wouldn't be our role to do that. But if this is a phased project, then it would be our role to see the potential, the connectivity, and where there could be room for innovation in terms of working outside the cultural organisation. So for me, I see this as, you know, culturally driven, but where innovation can take place and where diversity can take place is, I don't see it just sitting within the cultural sector. I see there's options within this. So, you know, depending on the project, depending on where they sat, I would look to extend beyond that as well. So that's just another point.
Yeah, and I think that's really key, because if someone is addressing a challenge that might be around health or transport, or, you know, there will be lots of other elements in that. So if we focus it around the challenge that's being tackled, then absolutely, yeah, you can open it up. Sorry, Laura, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what you were saying, is the exploration of like how we're seeing research. And it's actually, you know, and your explanation was brilliant. I was just thinking also, it's about that iterative approach. So what we're trying to do is give creatives the opportunity to apply and finesse and change and learn. Often when things are just a commission, you have to do that quietly in the background, or you're using 6 years of additional work to allow you to deliver in a front-facing way. And what we're trying to do is, rather than force that focus onto the front-facing end goal, to go, we honour that process. And so it's not academic research. You might end up doing a lot of reading. There may be some things that you want to unlock, but it's just as an iterative process might be different pieces of artworks on the side of the same bus over the course of 4 months, where every week there's a different piece of artwork on that bus. I don't know, I'm totally riffing, but just because you mentioned transport, you know, it's it might be continuously engaging with the same street, or a very small group of people who are shielding, for whom you know that there is a cultural exploration that you've been wanting to do, and you're trying to find out ways of doing that. We're not presuming that it's that kind of, it's more about that the same way as you go from a sketch to the final oil painting, there's a whole process and there's layers of points along that journey. Whatever your art form, we're trying to use a language which is about giving permission for that journey, but that you're wanting to find your future creativity within the city, and find how that voice is may need to be, or could materialize, and that we don't really know at the moment. We're living in a really weird hybrid place where we're shifting between being able to have people in the room to potentially not being able to have people in the room, to do stuff outdoors but only for limited numbers. We're in that's why we're trying to say it's actually the permission to iterate and to research or to explore, because we're in a changing landscape, and we're going to continue being in a changing landscape for at least this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in addition to giving that permission, we want to show that we value that process and that it should be paid for, because a lot of time it is only the end product that's paid for, and there is a huge amount of work that goes into that. So we're okay with, I guess in a traditional sense, some failure within that time, where things maybe don't work how you had anticipated, as long as that is part of evolving towards a project or a solution or a product that takes that all into account. Donna, did you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Laura was saying, really. I think we often work in the culture of delivery. So for me, often the best things come from the process and not knowing what the end result's going to be. And that's contemporary art. That's how we tend to work. And I think to okay research and process and all of those things in a way where it's transparent. If we're talking about sectoral growth and we're talking about wider growth, then it has to be on that basis. How do we learn? Where we learn from being transparent, and you know, how much of the learning are we going to then give other people access to through this process, where sectoral growth can be bigger than that, in the terms that, you know, we often don't have the transparency of the learning or the process. Well, actually, you know, this could be an opportunity for us to do that, and for it to be seen as a positive thing rather than just a delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will think, depending on the projects, which is why we have to be a little bit vague at this point, we will think very carefully about how we disseminate, exactly as Donna's saying, so that it's not just this cohort that benefits, but other sector organisations. You know, if someone is doing something about digital that people can adopt, or if someone is doing something about, you know, outdoor performance that can be adopted. And as Laura's saying, this is a massively changing world as well. So we don't know what things will look like in a month or 6 months' time. So how can that learning be taken and used by others in a way that is transparent through this process? There's been another question come through, I think, from Ben about timeframes. Absolutely, stuff can start happening as early or as late in that process as is needed for the project. We are mindful that for some people, that they will have had this idea in their head for years and just never had the funding route to do it. So they might be more ready to go, and that's fine. As soon as agreements and contracts are signed, we would be ready to support. For others, you know, signing the agreement will start the process for them. So as long as, you know, we would need to get a sense through the application form of timeframes, and we would need to get a real consent around the fact that this project has the ability to be delivered. I think that's what we would want to make sure as well. So we're really happy to support ideas, but we would need to have some clear indication of how practically that would come to fruition. And that will be part of our assessment as well. So it doesn't have to be pre-formed, but we would need confidence that it could happen and in the way that you sort of structured it. So everyone will be different in that sense, but we would be ready to go as soon as we're contracting. Sorry, I'm just reading Helen's project. If you apply for 10k, would you be offered less? Oh, okay, no, but so my take on this, I haven't discussed this with Laura and Donna actually. My take on this is we either fund the whole thing or none of it, because I don't, personally, I don't understand how you scale back with an invitation of part funding. Laura, Donna, is that a thumbs up in your regard, or?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's one of the really tricky places we've got into over the last few years with cultural funding is often people go, cool, I'd like a 150k project, but we've only got 30k to bring to the table, so can you do it for that? And I think what we're presuming is that you are realistic about how much you think it will cost. If there's something you're bringing to the table, I think kind of maybe the other question I'd have back to us, which I'm not sure we've asked ourselves as clearly as well, is if it's a project that's going to cost more and you've got money that you can bring to the table, and therefore you're asking for us for, you know, if it's going to cost 14k and you would like 7k from us and you've already got 7k from somebody else, and that means that something can be achieved in a way that's far more, then I think we would also be open for that, would we be?
Yeah, so in the budget template, it asks, you know, whether you've got other sources of funding that you need to make the whole project possible. So ask for the total project and what you're asking for from this fund. Our criteria does set out that if it is more than what this fund can fund, you must have the other money secured. And I know that that's difficult, but I think because this is a relatively short time frame, we're asking in this instance that that money is already secured rather than speculative. But absolutely, that, you know, 3 or 10k, whatever it might be in between, could be part of a much bigger project, and this is one element of it. We would just have to make sure that the requirements we're asking from the project can be delivered in amongst your other funders' requests as well. And so you must think about the kind of burden of responsibility there and time commitment if we're one of many jigsaw piece of funders. But yeah, that's fine. And we sort of listed that within the budget requirements. Okay, I'm just going to check that that's all. So I think that's all the questions that we have received in this chat. Thank you very much for participating. If you have any others, we are very happy to receive them, but please be mindful that we will be taking a stance that any question answered to any individual will then be placed on the collective Q&A discussion. So we will be able to answer questions that are much like you've asked today about the process and the criteria and the approach, we won't be able to advise or support on the writing of individual applications. So please feel free. There's a sort of contact information on our website, and that will come through to my colleague Sabrina, and we will be able to answer as best we can, but we will then making those public, so don't give away all your secrets and your questions, and we'll try our best not to share all of those. So thank you. I'm going to end the session there unless anyone has any other questions. I hope that has been useful for you and has hopefully encouraged you to apply and bring forward some really exciting proposals. We're genuinely excited about what will come forward, and we're trying to make the process as open as possible to make that a reality for the city. So please do have a think. If there's more questions you have, let us know. Sabrina's put her contact details in the chat there, and we'll make sure that that's visible to everyone on the website as well. And thank you for your time today, and to the partners. We look forward to making this a reality in Plymouth. So thank you very much.